What's good, Baylor family? It's Friday, August 16th, and we are officially 15 days away from the first football game of the 2024 Baylor football season. Welcome into Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. I'm here, Colt Barber, with Grayson Grunhafer, and today on the show, we're going to talk about what is potentially the most important position group for Baylor in 2024, the offensive line. Grayson, 3 position coaches in the matter of a month, a lot of new faces. Do you agree that this is the most important position group for Baylor in 2024, just being able to elevate from what they did last year?
I mean, it's definitely the easiest one to point to. You look kind of around this roster and there's a lot of signs for optimism, right? There's a lot of young talent. There's guys emerging. There's, Carl Williams in the secondary. There's, Jackie Marshall on the defensive line, Keaton Thomas at linebacker. What's the one position where we literally have not heard a single, just great thing said about a position? It's been the offensive line. And it's kind of troubling when you put it like that. But the good news is you really just need a cohesive 5. And they went out, tried to address the position through the transfer portal. And this is where we're at. But I do agree, this is the position that's going to make or break Baylor's 2024 season.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to know what to make of a group like this that, until this moment, they have attempted to get guys on campus. They'll have one guy who's not officially on the roster. We can't mention his name. They've recruited him, got a commitment, and they're still trying to build out that depth. And at this stage, adding new guys probably isn't going to make a major impact, but it kind of shows where they were, right, dating back to December. And then you bring in a guy like Kurt Daniker, goes to the spring, gets hurt, can't make it. Like, you were hoping that he was going to be a starter for you this fall. Then you had to find his replacement. And so it's just, you're changing schemes. And I would say that to a great extent that they're changing into a scheme that can protect the offensive line. Like, you can kind of hide it a little bit better than you would in a wide zone scheme. But overall, like, you still have to produce. And the good news is that I think that they have a cohesive staff of knowing that they are what they're doing at the offensive coordinator position, the offensive line coach that with Mason Miller, they've worked in very similar schemes throughout their career. Maybe not directly together, but they really understand that entire air raid system that they, derive from. That's who they are. And so they're, Mason Miller, has been around. He's been a head coach, offensive coordinator, was Mike Leach's offensive line coach for a multitude of years. And now they have to build it in fall camp.
Right. And that's kind of the trick, right, is that he's having to build this offensive line while also bringing in more pieces during the summer. And I think that's been kind of one of the more intriguing, and also probably the thing that has probably impacted this group the most is just, trying to get guys ingrained into the culture of Baylor and get them ingrained to the scheme and the system, while also trying to build out your best 5 possible. And so I think that that's been a challenge probably for the offensive line up to this point. But I do agree. I think it's very nice that you have a lot of cohesiveness between your offensive line coach and your offensive coordinator as far as kind of how they've kind of built out their careers and the offenses they've been in. That's very intriguing. I think they know what they need. The question is, do they have the guys on campus that can do that?
Yeah. So you mentioned the transfers that came in. Kirk Daniker, Omar Agbedian, I believe is how you say his name. Forgive me, I'm not good with these. But bringing in those 2 guys in the spring, losing one of them, and now they're basically bringing 4 guys in the summer. The good news is that summertime's much different now than it used to be. Summertimes they can be more hands-on. And without that, that would have been devastating in a lot of ways to say we're going to have to develop 4 guys in fall camp like that, not just in the weight room, but in the fall camp.
Definitely. I think that's a huge benefit. I would also say though, I think one thing that they can't do is they can't, do anything as far as pads go. Like you're not out there moving people and really, playing real games. And so for that reason, I think you get out here for fall camp and it's like, wow, this guy looked
What do we
really
have?
good, you know, when he was just wearing shorts and a t-shirt. But now it's like you got to actually go out and move people and read coverages. And that's where things change. I think overall, though, they brought in size, they brought in experience. And you're exactly right. This offense is much more friendly. This scheme, I think, is more friendly to your offensive linemen. But at the end of the day, you still got to be able to hold up up front. Last year, they got pushed into the backfield just routinely. This year, can they at least establish the line of scrimmage and just not get moved 2 yards into the backfield immediately? That's one area. Can they pass block well enough to keep these quarterbacks healthy? That's another area. But it is intriguing that they have brought in so much talent.
Yeah. So you have four transfers in: Colin Truitt, Omar Agbadian, sorry again, Sidney Fugar, and Colton Thomason, all from a variety of different places, right? I mean, just all over the country. Colton would have been the most familiar from Texas A&M. Omar came, I didn't type it out, but
Montana State.
Montana State. Sidney came from South Carolina, and Colin Truitt came from Chattanooga. And so they really searched high and low. And then Kirk Daniker, whenever he was committed, was from Ohio. And so they really just said, who fits our scheme the best? They knew what scheme they were going to have at that point, and they went out and got guys. And so you have size, you have competition, and truthfully, a year ago, they did not have all of that. They were relying on 3 redshirt freshmen for the most part. They had a sophomore who retired basically after the first game and really forced the issue. And then, what they have now, I think if they wanted to put together a 3-deep right now, some of the 3-deep would be redshirt freshmen, true freshmen, but they could do it. And they could not do that last year.
Right. I mean, I put together the 3-deep based on what we saw at practice, and there was one walk-on in that third group. Outside of that, it was all guys who are on scholarship, and none of them are true freshmen. So, I mean, there is depth there. There's quality depth. There's talent. I think I do think there is talent there. I just think a lot of this is about, are these young guys ready to push and show their talent, or is Mason Miller going to trend to more experienced guys and maybe guys that don't have the higher upside, but maybe have the higher floor? And that's maybe what you would see with someone like a Ryan Lingyel, who's basically been starting at guard since the spring. Mm-hmm. But it's been surprising, right? Because I guess not since the spring. Kurt Daniker was starting over him, but Lingyel was fighting for a role next to Omar Agbadian and fighting with Omar Agbadian for that right guard role. And now he's kind of fighting again in the left guard role. So that's really interesting. Campbell Barrington coming back for his second year at Baylor after transferring in from BYU. He seems like he's kind of been another stalwart at their right tackle position. And then Colton Price at center is the other guy that seems to be locked in. Mm-hmm. And then this week we had the crazy news that I posted on Sikkim 365 where Alvin Abasele had been the starting left tackle since the spring, really since last year. And now you're kind of seeing, okay, they're trying other guys there as well, like Caden Siraki. So that's another interesting thing that's just, I think they're just trying to figure out who their best 5 is, honestly.
Yeah. And I think that's the tough part from our position is that we're not out there for all the live periods. We're not out there for the scrimmages. So they might be saying, hey, we thought that, Alvin's backup was going to be capable, but now we need to get someone else ready there in the event that he can't play. So that could be the reasoning, or it could just be, we got to figure it out, period. And if we don't, we're going to have an issue. So let's get our best 5 on the field. So we don't know all those answers. We won't know. I don't even think through, the Tarleton game, what really is going to be the offensive line. Cause I would imagine if they can get out, they're going to rotate guys. You hope, you don't want it to be another Texas State situation from last year, but they have to get the best 5 out there. They can't, if it's the lowest, if right now you have a guy that has high potential to play him at left tackle, but you don't know if he's going to struggle or not, you can't afford to do that. You got to get your highest floor guys out there. And that means if like you mentioned, if it's the returning guys, kind of I hate to use this again, but the forgotten pieces of Gavin Byers and Ron Lingyel and Campbell Barrington, and obviously the young guys in Colton Price, Caden Siraki, and Alvin, those guys have played and they played at Baylor, and that is worth something. I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think that a guy like Omar is going to play one of the guard positions. It seems like he has been in a guard position since the spring, and he's kind of locked down that right guard position. But outside of that, I mean, I would really say your left tackle and your left guard positions are the ones that are most up for grabs right now. And that's up to Mason Miller and Jake Spavital, and obviously David Randon to an extent, to figure out who the best ones are. And we don't know. I mean, we see the practices. We don't know how they're grading in these scrimmages. This coming scrimmage on Saturday is going to be the biggest one. I just hope that whatever they put out there can keep the quarterbacks healthy, because game one last year, that was not the case. Game one last year, Blake Shapen was hurt. Game two against Utah, Sawyer Robertson's hurt. Like, I mean, it just was like one thing after the other, and I think that impacted their season more than we want to admit. Follow Baylor Plus and Sikkim 365 today on X, Instagram, and Facebook, and sign up for the new premium content bundle. For the monthly price is $17.99, a $5 per month savings. Baylor fans can access the full offerings that both platforms offer: the long-form storytelling, video, and all access behind-the-scenes content of Baylor Plus, and the premium news, analysis, and forums of Sikkim 365. Sign up today on either platform.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, leave a review, and tell your friends about us. Catch Colt and I on Inside Baylor Sports every weekday. You can also watch the video version free over at BaylorPlus.com or the official Baylor Athletics YouTube channel. Yeah, it did. And I mean, the good news is that, you know, you're getting a more athletic quarterback regardless of who starts, whether it's Sawyer or, you know, DeQuan Finn. And Sawyer's injury was in the open field. It was kind of his fault that he took that hit. But
don't tell him that.
Yeah, right. But Shapen, on the other hand, his was just getting pummeled in the pocket, which we saw all last year. I mean, just really tough if you're not mobile with a bad offensive line. And so I think that will help some things. I'm so curious. Guys like Colton Thomason and Sidney Fugar, two very intriguing transfers that they brought in. I'm curious if one of them can sneak in and take a spot before the season starts, because those two guys have very high upside. The question is the floor. I mean, that just simply put is the question. But I do like the fact that they bring in a lot of size. I think Thomason's like 6'8", 312, and then Fugar 6'5", 341. That's just a different level of size than I think what they have had in the past, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, across the offensive line, I mean, with the exception of Clark Barrington last year, and your three starting redshirt freshmen are going to be bigger and stronger. They brought in guys who were intentionally brought in to be bigger and stronger. You're kind of maxed out with probably a Gavin Byers type. Ryan Lingiel is a different type of offensive lineman than they really played last year. He was actually recruited prior to Jeff Grimes, and he was recruited prior to this system. So he's kind of in between guy that kind of might have almost found his own because of the scheme change. But yeah, you're right. I don't think that they're going to be as physically weak because of the fact that they're just going to be older and more mature in a college system. Not just with the guys that are returning and the guys that they brought in. So if they can figure out how to at least hold their own, not give up tackles for loss in the run game, and let the quarterbacks get the ball out of their hand, that's going to be the key. And we talked about the receivers. We've talked about the running backs. You have to get those guys the ball. You have to get Finn or Robertson. If you're going to run them, let them get to the edge a little bit. And that's put it back on the coaches. They have to get the best five out of this group. And I think by the time we get to the Utah game, we'll probably have a good idea of what that group looks like.
I think so as well. And if they don't, or if they feel like they have that group and then they go into the Utah game, you're going to find out really quickly whether you have that group or not, because Utah's defensive line is one of the better ones that they're going to face all year long. So you're going to know kind of what you have up front. And they've struggled, so far during camp. So I'm curious if that shift comes this weekend. They really need it to. You don't want to have two straight tough scrimmages. They really need to come out in this next one and hopefully just compete. I know Baylor's defensive line has made a nice leap and it's a good group, but they need to be able to hold their own. And if they do that, the offense should be able to move the football a lot better. I'm very intrigued by just kind of the pieces that they have. But again, the thing that's giving me hesitancy is just, do they have a starting five that is of the caliber that it needs to be to get around average in the Big 12? That's really the question for me, because if they do, then I think Baylor could go out and win quite a few games this year, maybe 8 wins if they have an average offensive line. But it feels like they're probably going to be below average again, which is probably going to put you in that 6-6, 7-5 range where you need games to kind of flip your way at the very end.
Yeah, and we talk about injuries. We don't know what's going on necessarily for these scrimmages, who's playing, who's not playing, in the reports that we get on these things. And I would hope that through this most recent scrimmage on Saturday that they were just putting anybody and everybody in there that they could. We know they're rotating quarterbacks. We know they're rotating running backs, receivers, and everything. But if this is your opportunity now to solidify your starting lineup, or say, this is what we want to go with in this particular scrimmage, that gives us an outlook to game 1 or game 2. And if it doesn't work, we got to make more changes. But you would hope naturally that those scrimmage reports that we hear Coach Aranda talk after, that they're more positive. Because I remember specifically after that, we can be better at quarterback. We can make better catches in the scrimmage. We can do this and do that. And I think that he would probably, if he would address the offensive line specifically, he'd probably say, we've got to figure out a consistent group. I mean, he addressed it with the quarterback situation. He straight up said, we have to come to a resolution. We can't let this go longer and longer if we know who we have. And I think that's for all the positions, with the exception of maybe running back. I think running back is going to be truly by committee. But the consistency that you can get in a scrimmage by playing the same 5 guys that you played in the week at the ones can help when it comes to the scrimmage, and obviously for the game days this fall.
Definitely. And hopefully he gets asked kind of direct questions about that after the scrimmage this weekend, because I do think that is an area where, again, I just don't feel
know.
like we've heard great stuff. We really haven't heard good or bad really about this group directly from Aranda, outside of it being a group that we obviously know they needed to get better at. I mean, they brought in all these transfer guys for a reason. Like, they have to get better at this. They got to have more competition. It's not just because they wanted to add talent. They had to just simply revamp everything up front. And so that's what they did. But I just, I feel like as we've gone through, fall and even in the spring, we just haven't gotten a lot of, I think, noise about any one particular player. We haven't gotten, oh, this guy is just really standing out among the group or anything along those lines. And my initial thought was that guy was going to be Alvin Ebasele, and it might be because his talent is very clear. But it's also very clear that a lot of these other guys are competing and bringing a lot to the table. And so it's just like, who's going to really rise to the occasion and play up to their talent level? If guys are able to do that, then they'll play. If not, then you're going to play the guys that you can trust.
Yeah. And to that, I listened to the Jake Spavital, and I've referenced this a couple of times now, the Jake Spavital interview with J-Mo on Baylor Plus. And he really made a good point in that through the spring and through the summer, they're just kind of learning who guys are. Then the fall was really going to be about, okay, now who's actually going to go do it? Who's going to be reliable? And I really think that might be part of the reason we haven't heard a lot without he just hasn't been asked about him for one. He's going to offer up some, he's not going to offer up everything. And he just hasn't been asked about the offensive line directly, which is interesting because it is a huge question mark. But I just wonder, with the 4 transfers in, they're just leaving this competition open as long as they can and letting guys have the opportunity. Because you look at like Ryan Lingyell, like he is there. He's been going through spring. He's gone through summer. Now he's in fall camp. So you can't automatically just give up his starting position that he has worked towards. And so I just wonder if some of that, there's some give and take of, we kind of know, but we don't really know. And we're not willing to just give it up. We need someone else we need Colton Thomason to rise to the occasion and take a starting job to improve this offensive line. Because right now, I mean, they're truly 4 guys that should be potentially 5 once this junior college guy gets on campus and is able to compete. Truly 5 that could say, I could be playing this fall. I'm talented enough to be playing this fall, but you haven't put in the work at Baylor and earned the trust of your teammates and your coaches yet. So maybe I'm off. Maybe it shouldn't be the Utah game, because truthfully, if you're looking at the Utah game as a must win, you probably have unrealistic expectations for this team this year. And so maybe they're just looking at the long game of like, let's find our groove as we get into the meat of the schedule and get later into the year, because we're going to need every win that we can get. And let's let this competition play out longer. Maybe that's the mindset. Maybe that's the approach that they're taking with this group.
Yeah, that definitely could be the approach that they end up going with. I did want to bring up this because I think that just kind of drawing the differences between the wide zone scheme and this scheme, I feel like it's important to mention that the moment Chris Kapilovic got to Baylor and then Mason Miller as well, the type of offensive lineman they were going after shifted quite a bit. And they really made a focus to get bigger. I mean, bigger bodies, taller, longer, but just mainly big. Whereas in the last group, it was more about athleticism. You didn't have to be the biggest. You just had to be able to move people, and you had to be able to move yourself and get downfield and get outside. And so we saw this with Art Briles as well. You know, Art Briles' teams basically across the offensive line, it was basically like 320 pounds was the smallest person on the offensive line. And it was normally Spencer Drango, who was your best offensive lineman, who was sitting there at 320 playing left tackle. And so I'm curious that's always made me, since this new offense came in, made me just kind of be on alert about guys that are massive. And if that truly is a differentiating factor between some of the guys on the roster, because, you know, like you mentioned with Ryan Lingyel, he doesn't necessarily fit that mold. Whereas you look at, you know, Sidney Fugar at 341 pounds, it's like, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. That fits the mold. So I think that's a piece of it too, is just kind of what they gravitated towards recruiting wise and how they've kind of tried to change the offensive line and change the body types. I think now they got 10 guys over 310 pounds this year, whereas last year they, I think, had, you know, 4, and I think 3 of them aren't even at Baylor anymore. So it's like they didn't play much or didn't impact the game much. So I found that to be interesting, and that's definitely something I'm going to monitor this year as well, to see kind of what their type is up front.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And two, I think if you look at the young guys on the roster, I mean, obviously Caden Siraki is massive. He's a mountain. I mean, they listed him at 6'9" this year, and I think he had been listed at 6'7" and 6'8" his first. Like, I guess he's still growing. Then his brother, he didn't get it. He's still big. Colton is still big, but not nearly this size. But you look at Caden, and you look at Alvin, and Colton. Obviously, he's a center, so it's a little bit different situation. But those are both big guys, right? They're going to be bigger. They're playing tackle. They're a little bit more athletic. And that's what they're looking at for the tackle. And that might be part of the reason with Caden moving to the left tackle position. Maybe they just like that size a little bit more than they do with Alvin. And we don't know where that's going to go. But what I will say is that I do believe, especially you adding Colton Thomason, the young wave of offensive linemen coming through the program right now, there's a solid foundation there. And I think what you saw, with the exception of Colton, is that they wanted to just load up on older guys to almost bridge them to that younger group. Because I think even though it's not the same system, there are some good fits, with the understanding that next year could be another transfer portal year that you add and you fill in holes where you want bigger guys. But the other good news is that Omar, Sidney, Colton, they're all 3-year or multiple year transfers. So they're bringing in for this year, but they're also going to have another year. And the junior college, same way, 3 years to play 2, potentially play another year. So the direction of this offensive line for me is as good as it's been in a long time. Even under the Matt Rule group, like, that group was patchwork, believe it or not. Like, they had some guys in there, but if you think about the Matt Rule years, they relied on young guys, Xavier Newman, Connor Galvin. The list is much longer than that, but
Khalil
even
Keith,
Gavin
Micah
Byers,
Mascua.
Yeah, they rode a wave of the young guys to get them to where they were in 2019. They did have some transition years, Blake Blackmore, those guys, but overall, the direction of the offensive line right now at Baylor is as good as you can tell. It's been made an emphasis. It's just, when does it click, and does it click? And I think it will. We just don't know the timeline for that yet.
Right. And I mean, to be frank, there's going to be a need for the transfer portal every single year on the offensive line. I mean, whether it's you're looking for one starter or multiple or depth pieces, you got to address it through the transfer portal. I mean, that's your area. That's where you're able to make up ground. That's where you can kind of replenish if you miss on a particular recruiting class. That's kind of what they did with Colton Thomason. He's a redshirt freshman. I mean, this is a guy that's got 4 years to play at Baylor. So he really does kind of fit in to kind of them maybe either missing on guys or not having a full recruiting class. And now you bring in a guy like that and he kind of plugs into that class breakdown really nicely. And so, I think it's a fascinating thing to watch. I think the transfer portal is always going to be very important, just like it was this year. Hopefully not to this extent, though. Hopefully you're only going after, a couple guys instead of 4, 5, 6. That would be kind of ideal. But I agree with you. I think they're in a good position. They got a lot of intriguing guys that are still developing. And now it's really just on Mason Miller to try to find the group that's going to be successful for them and that can run their offense.
Yeah. And I've kind of talked myself into the expectations being the long game for this year after this conversation. Truly, like if they brought in 4 guys, 5 guys that this summer that needed time to learn the scheme, to compete, to meet the standards of the program, maybe it's the last 6 games of the year that we really see this O-line gel. There are guys returning. I mean, you could potentially be looking at a different starting 5 at the end of the year than you did at the beginning of the year. And that's comes with the territory of a new system, but also a lot of new faces, and you don't know what you're going to get from them. So, man, well, this is offensive line. I mean, this is to me what hinges between a non-bowl season going to a bowl game. And if they become good, not just average, if they could potentially somehow become good, then maybe it's an 8-win season because of this group. I think everything else, all the pieces offensively around them are good enough. It's just, can this group expedite the entire team? Do you have a prediction? Do you think this group can become good?
Oh, gosh. Good. I think good is probably a little bit too strong, but I do think they can get into kind of that middle of the pack in the Big 12. So if average of the Big 12 is considered good, then I guess they can get there. And I kind of agree. I think it might take them some time. And the tough part is the beginning of their schedule is very difficult. I mean, it's very challenging. There's a lot of speed bumps in there. So they're going to have to be at least solid, serviceable at the beginning of the year if they're going to have any success later in the season. But I think they can get to the middle of the pack by the end of the year. The question is that soon enough for them to win football games and for them to be competitive for the entirety of the season?
Yeah. And I'll leave it at this. I think that the offensive layout, the positions, the play calling, the quarterback sets this group up in a much more favorable light than it did the last 2 years. And I think if as a unit they can become average, that this team will be good enough to get back to the postseason. And I think that's low expectations. Maybe you don't like that, but that's the reality of where this group is right now. And so I'm anxious to see it. All right, guys, next week we're going to be talking about the defense. We're going straight through the defense, just like we did with the offense. A lot of moving pieces over there too. I mean, this is a crazy year in terms of the same coaching staff for the most part, same head coach. Obviously, he's changed roles, and we're going to be talking about a defense that has a lot of moving parts. So that's it for today's episode of Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. Thank you all for listening. Once again, for Grayson Grunhafer, I'm Colt Barber. Have a great Friday, and Sick 'em Bears.